Samburu Reserve, dusk. The herds were already moving eastward, their backs silhouetted against the last low light above the trees. Dust followed them like smoke, a soft, rust-colored fog trailing their steps as they crossed the riverbed. Near the water's edge, one shape did not follow. A single elephant stood alone. She faced the river but did not drink. Her legs were firm, planted with tension. Her trunk did not sway. Her ears, usually in slow motion with breath or heat, hung still at her sides. And though the air was cooling, her body trembled once, briefly, as if from within. She did not flinch when a bird darted past her. She did not respond to the final calls of her herd fading behind the ridge. Her skin bore the marks of dried soil and flies. Beneath her right eye, a streak of wet shone against the gray, fresh and slow. From the bluff above, Caleb lowered his field glasses. He had watched this same stretch every evening since the long rains ended, monitoring seasonal shifts, new births, and grazing lines. But this elephant, he had not seen her before. She hadn't been among the known groups, and no calves lingered nearby. He made his way down the slope, boots careful against loose rock. He approached without urgency. His hands stayed low. She didn't look at him. Her breathing was shallow but steady. The closer he came, the more details he could see. A healed scar over her flank, slightly sunken cheeks, and the left hind leg. Not broken, but held oddly rigid. Her ribs shifted with each breath. He stopped at a respectful distance, watching her body more than her eyes. She gave no sound. Not a rumble, not a hiss, not even the soft exhale of discomfort. She stood as if braced for something, as if something already happened, and now she had to remain still or the ground would break beneath her. Behind Caleb, the reserve was quiet. The radio on his belt crackled once, but he didn't answer. The moment wasn't urgent. It was delicate. If he moved too close, she might bolt and worsen whatever was holding her in place, but if he left now, the night would swallow her, and whatever pain she was in would continue unseen. He stepped forward again, slow and even. A warm wind moved across the grass and lifted a single torn leaf into the air between them. She blinked once. Then, as if by choice, she turned her head just slightly, enough that her right eye caught his silhouette, not wide with fear, not dim with shock, but focused, alert. Caleb whispered once, "It's okay." She didn't move. He stood there beside her until the last of the daylight faded. No herd came back. No other elephant called from the hills. The river ran quietly at their side. Whatever she had lost, calf, herd, strength, it was gone before Caleb arrived, but now she was no longer alone. And still she didn't leave. If she stayed like this through the night, infection could set in. If she ran, the leg could fail beneath her. If no one intervened, she might not survive the next 24 hours. But if she let him stay, if she stayed still, they might have a chance to find out what had happened. The last light dropped beneath the ridge. Behind her, the river caught the pink edge of dusk, barely moving, and beside it, she stood as if waiting for something only she would know when to accept. Caleb stayed just outside her reach as night took the light. Her stillness wasn't out of calm. It was the sort born of exhaustion, of discomfort too constant to resist. The way her weight leaned forward, slightly off-center, told him more than the dried blood on her hind leg. Pain had rooted her here, not sharp enough to scream, not deep enough to collapse, just constant, just enough to keep her in place. He moved in a quiet arc around her, never crossing her gaze directly. The elephant adjusted slightly, turning the injured leg away from him, not in fear, but reflex, as if protecting the wound was more important than watching him. Her eyes tracked him once, then lowered. He saw the slow ripple of her ribcage as she exhaled through her trunk, the breath almost silent. A torn branch lay nearby, its leaves dry and untouched. She hadn't foraged. Caleb crouched down, scanning the leg. The swelling ran thick up toward the knee. The skin darkened where blood had pooled, then hardened. A puncture, likely from a tusk or sharp wood. It hadn't happened today. She had walked on it, for days, maybe more, until she couldn't walk any more. He pulled the radio to his mouth, speaking low into the quiet. 2 syllables, a location. The reply came fast. They would send a vet. No lights, no noise, just one vehicle and a man who'd treated injured elephants before. Still, Caleb kept his eyes on her as he spoke. She shifted again. Not to run, but to steady herself. Her trunk curled briefly inward, then dropped. A low groan passed from her throat. He had heard it before, in mothers separated from their calves, in bulls brought down by wire traps. It wasn't a call. It was a release. Caleb stepped forward, then knelt. His presence didn't push her away. If anything, she seemed to fold further into herself. She did not move. She did not charge. Her ears stayed low, her gaze unfocused. He reached the nearest patch of dry soil and dragged his palm across it, leaving a visible mark. A signal for the team to know this was the right place. When he stood again, she had not lifted her head. If they approached too fast, she could collapse. If they waited too long, infection would take hold. Either way, her leg could stiffen beyond repair. The air cooled quickly. Small insects clung to the edge of her ears. She did not swat them away. By the time the headlights blinked once through the trees, she had not moved more than half a step. The vet remained inside until Caleb waved once. No rush. The elephant's stillness was not an invitation. It was a warning. Caleb whispered gently, "We'll help you now." She did not respond, but the weight in her stance shifted, just slightly, as if something beneath her skin accepted the change. She hadn't come here for safety. She had simply stopped. But now there was movement behind her stillness, not in her legs or her steps, but in her permission. The sun was gone now. Only the low hum of crickets marked the hour. The wound would need to be cleaned. The vet would approach next, but for this moment the elephant waited, and did not run. They waited until the air had cooled completely, when even the insects fell quiet and the soil began to harden beneath their boots. The vet arrived with only what was needed, no floodlights, no convoy, just a canvas kit, antiseptic, and a voice that knew how to remain low. Caleb kept close as he guided him in. Each footstep placed as if the ground itself could listen. The elephant had not shifted in nearly an hour. Her head stayed low, her trunk tucked near her feet. She did not make room, but she did not resist. The vet murmured something brief as he knelt, then unpacked the kit slowly. No metal clanged. Every movement was small. The wound had worsened since Caleb first saw it. Heat rose from the skin, and the swelling had deepened toward the joint. It would need to be drained, cleaned, and packed. No sedation. The risk of her collapsing outweighed the risk of pain. Caleb stepped beside her flank. His presence remained constant, steady, unobtrusive. When the vet reached out with saline, her trunk lifted slightly, then dropped back with a long exhale. The sound was dry, but not distressed. He waited for her body to flinch, for her muscles to brace, but they didn't. She accepted it, not calmly, but willingly. The vet pressed gauze along the wound's edge and began to clean. Thick pus pooled against the cloth, followed by fresh blood. She let out a low moan, not from her mouth but from deep inside, where only living things store pain. Her back leg buckled half an inch and she leaned, not to flee, but toward Caleb. He placed his hand just above her shoulder blade. No pressure, no restraint, just a point of balance. Her skin twitched under his fingers but didn't move away. She was trembling now, not from fear, but from endurance stretched too far. Every few minutes the vet paused to let her breathe. Each pause was quiet. No one spoke beyond what was necessary. A second round of irrigation, a longer press with clean gauze, a final wrap in softened bandage. The infection had been caught early enough, but if she had gone another day without care, the swelling would have spread into the joint, locking it beyond recovery. Caleb noticed then what had been absent from the start. No tracks nearby, no younger elephants lingering at the edge of the trees, no distant calls, no responses to the ones she made. Whatever herd she had belonged to, it was no longer here, and if she had left behind a calf, it had not survived. She did not act lost, she did not search the horizon, but she stayed. That alone told him something had broken from her old life, and whatever remained had walked her here. As dawn approached, the vet packed his kit and stepped back without a word. The elephant shifted her weight once more, carefully adjusting her leg, testing the pressure. She did not cry out. She did not lie down. She stood straighter, slightly more centered. The worst had passed. Caleb stepped back 2 paces and waited. Her ears fluttered once. She turned her head toward him, just slightly, and then returned her gaze to the earth. Her trunk moved to brush against her own leg, a soft touch over the newly wrapped wound. The sky behind them brightened into a pale, colorless gray. The first birds returned, but she did not move. She remained beside him. She had the strength to leave now, but she did not. Not yet. Not while his scent still held the shape of care. Not while the place still remembered how they touched her gently. The wind moved across the grass and lifted the gauze just slightly along her bandage. She blinked once and stayed where she was, to harden beneath their boots. The vet arrived with only what was needed. No floodlights, no convoy, just a canvas kit, antiseptic, and a voice that knew how to remain low. Caleb kept close as he guided him in, each footstep placed as if the ground itself could listen. The elephant had not shifted in nearly an hour. Her head stayed low, her trunk tucked near her feet. She did not make room, but she did not resist. The vet murmured something brief as he knelt, then unpacked the kit slowly. No metal clanged. Every movement was small. The wound had worsened since Caleb first saw it. Heat rose from the skin, and the swelling had deepened toward the joint. It would need to be drained, cleaned, and packed. No sedation. The risk of her collapsing outweighed the risk of pain. Caleb stepped beside her flank. His presence remained constant, steady, unobtrusive. When the vet reached out with saline, her trunk lifted slightly, then dropped back with a long exhale. The sound was dry but not distressed. He waited for her body to flinch, for her muscles to brace, but they didn't. She accepted it, not calmly, but willingly. The vet pressed gauze along the wound's edge and began to clean. Thick pus pooled against the cloth, followed by fresh blood. She let out a low moan, not from her mouth but from deep inside, where only living things store pain. Her back leg buckled half an inch and she leaned, not to flee, but toward Caleb. He placed his hand just above her shoulder blade. No pressure, no restraint, just a point of balance. Her skin twitched under his fingers but didn't move away. She was trembling now, not from fear but from endurance stretched too far. Every few minutes the vet paused to let her breathe. Each pause was quiet. No one spoke beyond what was necessary. A second round of irrigation, a longer press with clean gauze, a final wrap in softened bandage. The infection had been caught early enough, but if she had gone another day without care, the swelling would have spread into the joint, locking it beyond recovery. Caleb noticed then what had been absent from the start. No tracks nearby, no younger elephants lingering at the edge of the trees, no distant calls, no responses to the ones she made. Whatever herd she had belonged to, it was no longer here, and if she had left behind a calf, it had not survived. She did not act lost. She did not search the horizon, but she stayed. That alone told him something had broken from her old life, and whatever remained had walked her here. As dawn approached, the vet packed his kit and stepped back without a word. The elephant shifted her weight once more, carefully adjusting her leg, testing the pressure. She did not cry out. She did not lie down. She stood straighter, slightly more centered. The worst had passed. Caleb stepped back 2 paces and waited. Her ears fluttered once. She turned her head toward him, just slightly, and then returned her gaze to the earth. Her trunk moved to brush against her own leg, a soft touch over the newly wrapped wound. The sky behind them brightened into a pale, colorless gray. The first birds returned, but she did not move. She remained beside him. She had the strength to leave now, but she did not. Not yet. Not while his scent still held the shape of care. Not while the place still remembered how they touched her gently. The wind moved across the grass and lifted the gauze just slightly along her bandage. She blinked once and stayed where she was. Morning rose clean but without color, the sky still pale from the night before. Dew clung to the edges of grass blades and spider silk stretched between low shrubs. The elephant had moved only slightly in the hours since her wound was treated. Just a slow, careful pivot to rest her weight differently. Her breathing had deepened, her trunk now sweeping small patches of soil as if testing its texture. Caleb stood a few paces off, arms crossed gently, watching for signs of strain. Her leg remained wrapped, and though the swelling persisted, there was no fresh bleeding. She had accepted care, but not dependence. She kept her distance, not out of distrust, but autonomy. The vet had already left, taking a narrow trail back through the dry brush toward the southern fence. The others began arriving just after sunrise. 2 rangers, an ecologist, and a tracker from a nearby conservancy. Men used to reading land like a language. They fanned out in slow, concentric sweeps, starting from the riverbank outward. Caleb briefed them quickly, then stepped back. He didn't want their voices near her. The search lasted 2 hours. They moved with practiced steps, bending low at the shallow crossings and kneeling to inspect broken stalks, bent reeds, scattered droppings. But the results came back quiet. There were no fresh prints besides the ones she had made herself. No trail of a herd, no secondary marks from a calf, no drag lines, no snapped tree bark high enough to suggest other adults. She had come in from the west. That much they confirmed. But the tracks ended too soon. She had likely traveled across dry rock, hard ground, places where even pressure leaves no trace. One ranger, Quito, returned with a faded branch in hand, the bark stripped in a pattern consistent with tusk rubbing. But it was old, at least a week, not enough to place her or any companions. Caleb took the branch, examined it, and handed it back. The others began to speak softly, their theories carried in half-whispers. A lone female, not yet old. No herd, no sign of recent birth, no aggressive wounds. This wasn't the aftermath of a predator chase or territorial fight. This was something else. Caleb moved toward her slowly and stopped where the earth dipped slightly, a place she had stood during the night. He crouched, brushing the soil where her feet had pressed down. He noticed then that her body had cast no fresh shadow of movement around it. Just that one arc of prints, arriving. She had walked here, not wandered, not scattered. A straight path, single-minded, but from where and why remained silent. One of the younger trackers glanced toward Caleb. "No trail," he said simply. Caleb nodded. She came alone. That was the truth of it. Not just physically, but in the way she carried herself. No looking back, no hesitation. Her presence was full, as if she had chosen this spot with intent. But intent didn't explain the wound. It didn't explain the loss. If she had followed someone, a ranger, a vehicle, even sent on the wind, there would be clues. If she had fled something, there would be disorder. But here, there was only stillness. and the faint trace of pain behind her eyes. The team broke off to return to base, leaving behind a perimeter marker and silence. Caleb remained. She watched him for a moment, then slowly closed her eyes. If they moved her now, her leg might tear again. If they left her, the infection could return. But if she chose to stay on her own terms, perhaps there was time. The wind passed low through the brush, catching the edge of her bandage. She shifted her weight again, deliberate, quiet, and alone. By the third morning, the swelling in her leg had begun to ease. The wound no longer bled, and her steps, though slow, had grown steadier. But she had not left. Each day, Caleb returned expecting to find empty space where she had stood, and each day she remained. Not in the same place, but never far. She moved with intent, shadowing the ranger's familiar path between the lower valley and the watering troughs near base. She kept to the edges, far enough not to intrude, close enough to see. No chains held her, no barrier closed her in. The plains stretched open in every direction. 100 places to go, and yet she chose this one. The others in the unit gave her space. Some watched quietly from the station windows, others paused to let her pass when she stood beside the eastern fence line. Caleb did not call to her. He never fed her, never beckoned. But still, when he crossed the dirt clearing at dawn, she would be there. Her trunk brushing low shrubs, her eyes lifting at the sound of his boots. In the afternoons, she grazed at the edge of the acacia stand where rangers parked their vehicles. She lingered behind the scent trails he left behind. Her pace matched his shifts in direction. When he slowed, she slowed. When he paused to survey the ridgeline, she stayed still. When he walked the southern route for fence inspections, she followed behind the brush, unseen by most but never absent. They did not speak of her presence often, not because they ignored it, but because naming it felt premature. No one wanted to suggest what it meant or what it risked. Because if she became dependent, and if something changed, if Caleb left or she was relocated, the bond could harm more than help. Yet each day she stayed, the stakes shifted. At night, she didn't return to the river. She settled instead near the dry slope behind the post, a quiet piece of land where old thorns grew crooked and no paths ran through. Caleb found the indentations each morning where her massive body had rested, the dust pressed in a wide, round shape, bordered by soft prints. On the 5th day, he left for patrol earlier than usual. No vehicle, just the long walk to the northern bluff. She wasn't nearby when he stepped off the track, but 2 hours later, while adjusting the solar tag on a camera trap, he heard it. A low, sustained sound. Not sharp, but tremulous. It wasn't a trumpet or a call. It was softer, a breath caught halfway between loss and warning. He turned and saw her standing at a distance, her body tense, her ears fanned low. She wasn't moving, but her eyes fixed on his shape. As he took a step toward her, she cried again, barely audible. A sound that held no threat, only weight. He walked back slowly, not speaking. When he drew near, she lowered her head and swayed. Her trunk hovered above the ground, then curled back in against her chest. It was not submission. It was recognition. A request, perhaps, not to be left unseen. If she stayed too long, the patterns of her wildness could erode. If they moved her now, it could break whatever thread had formed. But if she was choosing this place on her own, then the choice itself had to be respected. That evening, she stood near the southern fence, watching the sun lower past the hills. Dust gathered beneath her belly and rose in slow spirals with the wind. Her shadow stretched across the grass, long and silent, falling beside his without touching it. The footage came by accident. A researcher named Leona had been cataloging trail cam captures from the western stretch, aligning data on grazing paths before the long rains. She paused at a sequence dated 3 weeks earlier. Late afternoon, low sun, heavy shadow. The lens faced a shallow clearing not far from the southern escarpment. Caleb was there, kneeling beside a calf. The animal's sides barely lifted. The herd had scattered after a lioness crossed too close. It had taken hours to find the weak one. Lyona slowed the clip. Caleb leaned in, adjusted the calf's neck with one arm, then reached for water. He stayed with the small body long after the others had moved on. The camera, motion-triggered, flickered every few seconds, and in the upper frame, just behind the acacia bark, an ear twitched. Then a trunk lowered. Not the calf's. An adult, just out of frame, watching. She advanced in slow frames. The elephant emerged fully by minute 8. No tusks, younger than matriarch age. Not close enough to pose a threat, but near enough to see. She didn't move during the footage. She stood still behind Caleb, eyes fixed on the curled calf, her weight balanced but tense. She stayed until the ranger lowered his head, one hand resting on the dying animal's flank. Then she turned away. Lyona reviewed it 3 times before calling Caleb in. He stood behind her, arms crossed. The footage didn't show anything definitive. No markers, no scars, but the stance, the ear shape, the hesitation in her posture. It was her, the same elephant. Caleb didn't speak at first. He leaned closer. The date on the footage was 10 days before she appeared near the riverbed. He remembered the day. The calf had not survived. He had remained until nightfall, covering the small body with dried grass before the scavengers came. If she had seen that, if she had followed from a distance, she would have known the scent of his presence, his walk, his voice, his restraint. And if she had been traveling alone even then, the moment might have imprinted something. Not reason, not understanding, but something deeper, the recognition of care. There was no way to know where she came from, or why she hadn't joined other herds. She could have been separated. She could have been grieving. But in the image of her standing beside a calf she did not know, behind a man who had not called her, something had passed between silence and observation. Caleb returned to her later that day. She was grazing by the lower slope, the wrap on her leg loosened at the edge. He replaced it gently, the motions now familiar to both of them. She didn't cry when he pressed the fresh dressing into place. She looked up once, eyes clear beneath the dust. Her trunk curled toward his elbow, hovered, then lowered again. If she had come all this way because of something she saw, a gesture, a touch, a body grieved by hands that asked nothing in return, then it was not coincidence that she stayed. And if she stayed, not from pain, but from memory, then what had once been chance now held shape. The sun slipped behind the acacia line. The wind lifted a few loose feathers caught in the branches above, and below them her breath settled, long and steady. The morning came without warning. No shift in wind, no cry, no movement beyond the ordinary. The sun broke softly through the fringe of trees, laying thin lines of light across the clearing. Birds called from the canopy. Dust hung still. And the place where she had slept, her place pressed firm into the earth behind the ranger post, was empty. Caleb stepped outside before the others stirred. His boots moved through familiar grass, angled toward the edge of the slope. He looked first to the brush, then along the outer track, where she often waited in the early hours. But there was no sign, no scent in the wind, no dark figure rising from stillness. He crossed to the sleeping ground and stood where her shape had been. The imprint remained, wide and soft around the edges. The grass was slightly bent, the soil below still warm where her body had rested. But beyond that, nothing. No broken twigs, no dragging steps, no farewell. Just one mark remained, a single footprint deep and round pressed near the edge of the post, close to the place where Caleb had stood each evening to check the ridge. The print was turned slightly toward the doorway. Still fresh, still full. He crouched beside it, hand hovering just above the indentation. It hadn't been made in haste. It was deliberate. The weight balanced. Her final gesture before walking away. She had left during the night or in the hour just before light, quietly, without panic, without need. She had healed enough to move, and, more importantly, to choose. She had not wandered. She had returned to motion on her own terms, the way all wild things do when the pause has served its purpose. The others noticed her absence later, exchanging quiet looks across the yard. No one spoke loudly. No one raised alarm. They understood what it meant. If they searched now, they wouldn't find her. The land was vast, the forest open in all directions. She could be 5 kilometers away or just beyond the next bend, already folded into the rhythm of the herds that still moved unseen between valleys. Caleb stood for a long time beside the footprint. He thought of the footage, of the dying calf, of the way she had lingered behind him when no one else saw, and how she had walked to him after days of silence, bleeding, wounded, alone, not asking for rescue, but choosing presence. Now, the choice had reversed, and that, too, had to be accepted. He whispered once to the space she had left behind, a quiet line of breath that vanished into the air before it reached the leaves. In the distance, the wind moved through the upper branches and sent a ripple through the tall grass. The sun climbed higher. A soft layer of dust rose, curled, and settled again. Somewhere deeper in the wild, she walked with even steps and a heeled leg, her shadow stretching long in the light.